Right now, inside a pharmaceutical lab somewhere in the world, a scientist is studying a plant. Not because they discovered it, because an indigenous healer used it 3,000 years ago, and it worked so well that modern medicine cannot ignore it anymore. Here is what they will not tell you. Every single plant in this video was already being used perfectly and effectively for centuries, long before that lab existed. The Amazonian tribes, the Native American nations, the Pacific Islander healers, they did not have clinical trials. They had something better. 3,000 years of trial and error on actual human beings. And today, while you are spending $30 on a bottle of pills that took 10 years to approve, these 7 plants are growing wild, completely free, healing the same conditions they have always healed. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will never look at a weed the same way again. Before we start, a quick word about what you are about to hear. This is not alternative medicine. This is documented history. Every plant in this video has a recorded traditional use spanning centuries, and every single one has been studied by modern researchers who confirmed what indigenous healers already knew. The reason you have never heard of most of them has nothing to do with whether they work. It has everything to do with whether they can be owned. You cannot patent a plant that grows wild in the Amazon. You cannot build a billion-dollar supply chain around a root that any healer can dig from the ground for free. And without a patent, there is no profit motive. Without profit, there are no clinical trials. Without trials, there is no approval. Without approval, there is no shelf space. That is not a conspiracy, that is just economics. These are the 7 plants that fell through that gap. The ones that worked too well and cost too little to survive in a system built around selling medicine. Let us open the vault. Here is something nobody in mainstream media will say out loud. The global pharmaceutical industry generates over $1.4 trillion in revenue every year. That number did not appear by accident. It was built deliberately and systematically on a model that requires you to need medicine you cannot make yourself. Think about how that model works. A pharmaceutical company spends between $1 to $3 billion to bring a single drug to market. That investment only makes sense if the drug can be patented, owned exclusively, for long enough to generate returns. 20 years of patent protection. 20 years of being the only seller of a molecule that took $1 billion to approve. Now look at the plants in this video. They grow wild. They have been used for centuries. They cannot be patented because prior art, the documented history of their use, makes ownership legally impossible. So what happens when a researcher discovers that one of these plants works? The funding stops. Not because the plant failed the science, but because the science cannot generate a return. There is no investment thesis for a medicine that anyone can grow in their backyard. This is not a conspiracy. It requires no secret meetings, no shadowy figures, no deliberate suppression. It is simply the logic of a system that only funds what it can own. And the casualty of that logic, repeated across 100 plants, 1,000 studies, a century of research, is the accumulated healing knowledge of every indigenous civilization that ever existed on this planet. That is what you are about to hear. Plant 1. Pau d'Arco. The first plant takes us deep into the Amazon rainforest, to a tree the Inca called tahibo. For over 3,000 years, the inner bark of the tabebuia tree was the primary medicine of the most powerful civilization in the Americas. Think about that for a second. The Inca Empire controlled 2 million square miles of territory. They built Machu Picchu without iron tools. They fed millions of people across mountain ranges and jungle. And their healers, the elite traveling doctors called Kalawaya, carried one medicine above all others across every mountain pass and jungle trail they walked: Pau d'Arco. It was used for infections, for fevers, for open wounds, for inflammatory conditions that would have killed people in a world without antibiotics. And here is what modern science found when it finally looked. Inside Pau d'Arco bark is a compound called lapatol, a naturally occurring molecule with demonstrated antimicrobial, antifungal, and anti-inflammatory properties. In the 1960s, Brazilian hospitals were quietly using it. Researchers at the University of São Paulo got excited. The National Cancer Institute in the United States began investigating it in the early 1970s. Then the trials stopped, not because the bark did not work, but because isolating a single compound at high doses caused side effects. What nobody investigated, because there was no money to investigate it, was what happened when you used the whole bark, the way the Inca always did. Modern researchers now call it the entourage effect, the idea that plant compounds work together in ways that isolated molecules cannot replicate. The Kalawaya figured that out 3,000 years ago. The bark grows wild across South America. It cannot be patented, and so it sits in the gap between what works and what profits, waiting to be rediscovered. How to use it. Inner bark brewed as a deep reddish tea. Drink 2 to 3 cups daily. It is available dried in health food stores worldwide. Plant 2, Chanca Piedra. Chanca Piedra, stonebreaker. The second plant comes from the same Amazon basin, and its name in Spanish tells you everything you need to know. For centuries, indigenous healers across Peru, Brazil, and the wider Amazon used this small leafy plant for one specific purpose: breaking up kidney stones and gallstones without surgery. Not metaphorically, literally. The plant contains compounds that modern pharmacology has confirmed interfere with the crystallization process that forms kidney stones. A 2010 study published in the journal Urological Research found that Chanca Piedra significantly reduced the formation of calcium oxalate crystals, the primary component of most kidney stones. A 2002 study in the British Journal of Urology showed it relaxed the ureter, the tube connecting kidney to bladder, making it dramatically easier to pass existing stones. The Amazonian healers who used this plant had no idea why it worked at the molecular level. They just knew that it worked. And here is what makes this story particularly infuriating. Every year, 600,000 Americans undergo surgical or medical procedures for kidney stones. The average cost of kidney stone treatment in the United States is between $10,000 and $15,000 per episode. It is a multi-billion-dollar medical industry. And growing in the Amazon, freely and abundantly, used effectively for centuries, is a plant that addresses the problem at its root. It cannot be patented, it cannot be owned, and so it remains largely unknown outside the communities that never forgot it. How to use it. Dried herb brewed as tea. 1 to 2 cups daily. Widely available as a supplement under the name Philanthus neruri. Plant 3, cat's claw. Deep in the Peruvian Amazon, there is a vine that wraps itself around trees with curved thorns that look exactly like a cat's claws. The Usnea people, one of the largest indigenous nations in the Peruvian Amazon, have used this vine for over 2,000 years. They called it una de gato, and their uses for it read like a list of the most profitable conditions in modern pharmaceutical medicine: inflammation, joint pain, immune weakness, digestive disorders, and viral infections. The Usnea did not treat these as separate problems requiring separate medicines. They treated them as expressions of the same underlying imbalance, and cat's claw addressed all of them through a single mechanism that modern science has now confirmed. The vine contains a class of compounds called oxindole alkaloids, specifically isopteropidine and metraphyline, that have demonstrated significant immunomodulatory effects. A study from 1998 published in Phytomedicine showed cat's claw extract enhanced the immune response of human white blood cells by over 50%. A study from 2001 in the Journal of Rheumatology found that patients with rheumatoid arthritis who took cat's claw extract experienced significant reduction in pain and swollen joints compared to placebo. For the Usnea, this was not science. This was survival knowledge, accumulated over 2,000 years of living in one of the most biologically complex ecosystems on Earth. Here is what happened next. In the 1990s, a European pharmaceutical company filed patents on isolated compounds from cat's claw. The indigenous communities who had developed and preserved this knowledge over 2 millennia received nothing. No compensation, no recognition, no royalties. The compounds were patented. The whole plant, the way the Ashaninka always used it, remains outside the pharmaceutical system entirely. How to use it. Inner bark and root bark brewed as tea or taken as standardized extract. It is widely available in health food stores. Plant 4, Usnea. This next plant does not look like a plant at all. It hangs from trees in long gray-green threads in old forests across North America, Europe, and Asia. Most people walk past it every day without a second glance. Indigenous nations across North America, including the Cherokee, the Ojibwe, and dozens of Pacific Northwest tribes, used it as one of their primary wound medicines. It is called Usnea, and the reason it works is one of the most remarkable stories in natural pharmacology. Usnea contains a compound called usneic acid, one of the most powerful naturally occurring antimicrobial substances ever identified. Studies have shown it active against a range of gram-positive bacteria, such as Staphylococcus aureus, including some antibiotic-resistant strains. Read that again. A compound found hanging freely from trees in forests across the world, used by indigenous healers for centuries, shows activity against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. In a world where antibiotic resistance is one of the greatest public health crises of the 21st century, where the World Health Organization warns that we are approaching a post-antibiotic era, this plant hangs from trees for free. It cannot be patented. It grows on every continent except Antarctica. And outside of traditional medicine communities, almost nobody knows it exists. How to use it. Make a tincture in alcohol, apply it topically to wounds, or take it internally for respiratory infections. Always source Usnea from clean, unpolluted forests or reputable suppliers. Before we continue, take a moment to understand what it took to preserve this knowledge. The healers who developed and maintained these medicines did not have universities. They did not have research institutions, peer-reviewed journals, or government funding. They had memory, observation, and an unbroken chain of transmission from master to apprentice stretching back thousands of years. The Kalawaya healers of the Inca Empire memorized hundreds of plant medicines and walked thousands of miles on foot to treat communities across the Andes. Their knowledge was never written down. It lived in human minds, passed from father to son across generations. The Cherokee plant knowledge that survived into the modern era did so because specific families took on the responsibility of remembering. During the forced displacement known as the Trail of Tears, when the United States government forcibly relocated the Cherokee Nation from their ancestral lands, healers carried their plant knowledge in their memories across hundreds of miles of winter march. That is what it costs to preserve what you are hearing right now. And here is the bitter irony. In many cases, when Western researchers finally studied these plants and confirmed their properties, the patents on isolated compounds went to pharmaceutical companies in Europe and North America. The indigenous communities who had developed, preserved, and transmitted this knowledge across millennia received nothing. No compensation, no recognition, no royalties. The knowledge was taken. The profit went elsewhere. What remains? The whole plants, the traditional preparations, the methods that cannot be patented, is what you are learning today. Plant 5, Morinda root. The fifth plant takes us across the Pacific, to the islands of Polynesia, and to the mountains of southern China. Two civilizations separated by thousands of miles of ocean. No contact with each other for centuries. Both independently discovered the same root. In Polynesia, they called it noni. In China, it was baji tian, one of the 50 foundational herbs of traditional Chinese medicine, documented in the oldest Chinese pharmacopoeia written around 200 CE. The Polynesian healers used it for immune support, pain relief, and recovery from illness. Chinese imperial physicians prescribed it for fatigue, joint conditions, and what they called defensive energy, the body's capacity to resist disease. When two completely separate civilizations independently arrive at the same medicine, that is not coincidence. That is convergent discovery. Modern analysis has found over 165 beneficial compounds in Morinda root, including polysaccharides with confirmed immunostimulatory effects, anthraquinones with antimicrobial properties, and scopolamine with demonstrated anti-inflammatory activity. A 2012 study published in Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine confirmed significant antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. The Polynesian healers and Chinese imperial physicians were right. They just did not have the language of molecular pharmacology to explain why. How to use it: root juice, dried root tea, or standardized extract, available widely under the name noni. Plant 6. Elderberry. The sixth plant is the one that came closest to breaking through, and the story of what happened to it tells you everything about how the system works. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, called the elder tree his medicine chest around 400 BCE. Every part of the plant was used medicinally across ancient Greece, Rome, and Egypt. Here is the extraordinary part. Native American nations, with zero contact with European traditions, independently discovered the same plant for the same purposes. The Cherokee used elderberry for fever. The Iroquois used it for respiratory illness. Over a dozen separate indigenous nations across North America arrived at the same medicine as ancient Greek physicians. That is not folklore. That is cross-cultural scientific validation spanning thousands of years and 2 continents. In 2016, a randomized double-blind, placebo-controlled trial, the gold standard of medical research published in the journal Nutrients, found that elderberry supplementation significantly reduced cold duration and severity in air travelers. The study was real. The results were significant. The plant works. And yet, you will not find elderberry prescribed by any mainstream physician. You will not find it in any hospital formulary. You will not find it covered by any insurance plan. Because you cannot patent a berry that has been growing wild across 2 continents for 10,000 years. How to use it: ripe berries cooked into syrup. 1 tablespoon daily for prevention. Every 3 to 4 hours during active illness. Never eat raw elderberries, always cook them first. Plant 7. Yarrow. The final plant in this vault has the longest documented history of any medicine used by human beings. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neanderthals, our evolutionary predecessors, may have used yarrow over 60,000 years ago. Pollen from yarrow plants was found alongside human remains in a Neanderthal burial site in Iraq dated to 60,000 BCE, 60,000 years. The ancient Greeks named it after Achilles, the hero who used it to treat his soldiers' wounds at Troy. Every major civilization in the ancient world documented its use. Roman legions carried it as their standard field medicine. In the American Civil War and World War I, field medics packed open wounds with yarrow when bandages ran out. Over 60 Native American nations used it independently for wound healing, fever reduction, and pain relief. The science confirms everything they knew. Yarrow contains achillin, a compound shown in studies to measurably reduce bleeding time. It contains flavonoids and sesquiterpene lactones with confirmed anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. A study in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed significant wound healing activity. It grows freely in fields, roadsides, and gardens across every temperate region on Earth. It costs nothing, it cannot be owned, and it has been healing human beings since before our species had language. How to use it: fresh leaves applied directly to wounds to stop bleeding. Dried herb brewed as tea for fever and inflammation. One of the easiest plants to identify and grow at home. 7 plants, 7 civilizations, thousands of years of accumulated human knowledge. And here is the question that matters, the question you face now. What do you do with this information? The easy answer is nothing. Close the video, move on, let the algorithm send you something else. Most people will do exactly that. But consider what is actually at stake. We are living through a crisis of antibiotic resistance that the World Health Organization calls one of the greatest threats to global health. We are facing rising rates of chronic inflammation, autoimmune conditions, and metabolic disease that conventional medicine is struggling to address. We are spending more on healthcare than any generation in human history and getting sicker. Sitting in the gap between what works and what profits, growing wild in forests and fields and riverbanks across every continent, are plants that human beings have been using effectively for longer than written history. The indigenous healers who developed this knowledge were not primitive. They were scientists. They worked with the most sophisticated laboratory available, the human body, across thousands of years and millions of patients. Their results were not published in journals. They were written in the survival of their civilizations. That knowledge belongs to all of us. Not to pharmaceutical companies, not to patent holders, not to the system that decided it was not profitable enough to study, to all of us. And the first step to reclaiming it is knowing it exists. 7 plants, used by indigenous healers across every continent, validated by centuries of human experience, confirmed by modern research, and largely unknown to the billions of people who could benefit from them right now. This is not about rejecting modern medicine. Modern medicine saves lives every day and will continue to do so. This is about recognizing that we abandoned an entire library of healing knowledge, not because it failed, but because it could not be owned. The plants in this video grow wild. They cost almost nothing. And they have been healing human beings for longer than civilization has existed. Now you know they exist. If this vault matters to you, we have a free guide waiting for you right now. 7 forgotten plants with their full historical record, the science behind each one, and exactly why they disappeared from mainstream medicine. The link is in the description. It is completely free. And subscribe to Green Vault because every week we open another chapter of the knowledge the world tried to bury. The next vault opens soon.